Hello my friends, welcome back to my channel. Today we have a book wrap-up video for you. I'm going to be discussing all the books that I read in the month of November and the books that I ambitiously hope to read in the month of December. Now, if you've never been here for one of my book review videos before, first of all, welcome. And second of all, what I generally do is go over a tiny little summary of what the book was about, but I never give spoilers, and then I just cover my thoughts on the books. I give it a rating on a scale of 1 to 5. I don't think I've ever given a book a 0, but I mean, that's a possibility in the future. And if it's some type of a romance book, I will also include if there's any spice factor, so you know heading into it whether or not there's any scenes that are explicit. Now, I will say this, I don't have any specific or fancy rating system per se. I just go off of how I feel when I walk away from the book, how much I enjoyed the book, and whether or not I'd recommend it to a friend, and I consider you guys all friends. If you like book content, please feel free to follow me on my Instagram at Kate Chapters. I usually share anywhere from 4 to 7 book reviews a week because I have a large backlog of all of the books that I read that I keep track of on my GoodReads account. I also share some templates if you like to do book content on your own social medias. And if you go on my Instagram profile, there's a little highlight tab that says templates, and you can take those and use them as much as you want. So anyways, without further ado, let's go ahead and get into the books that I read in the month of November. I started off with a novella called Christmas on Merrily Street by Louis W. Gray. This was a novella and I gave it a 3.5 out of 5 stars. Spice was 0. It was a squeaky clean book, so if you're not into spicy scenes, this would be a good one for you to go for. This one was very short, very sweet. It's a small town setting, very Hallmark vibes, very like predictable in a good way, where like, you know, if you just need a comfort cozy read, this one would be a good one for you. The next book that I read was called Christmas Presents by Tara DeWitt. This one I gave a 5-star, but I will say this. This is essentially just a compilation of epilogues for her previous books. You don't necessarily have to have read the books to enjoy this because it's just Christmassy, vibey type situations that are happening. But the reason I enjoyed it so much was being able to revisit characters from her books. It's not something I'd be like, you have to read it. But again, it was just kind of an enjoyable thing, vibed out for Christmas. It was 5-star for me. Okay, the next book I have some strong feelings about, so buckle up. This was called His Holiday Pact, and it was by Ayla Asher. Hopefully I'm saying that correctly. I gave it a 2.5 out of 5 on the stars and 1.5 out of 5 on the spice factor. So this one was a novella, less than 200 pages, I believe, and essentially it's like 2 neighbors that don't really like each other that decide to try and help each other out by being fake dates to their holiday events that they have to endure with their family. The thing with this book is that the main character is a plus-size female, and I love that, but this book was only 200 pages, and I swear more than half of it was spent with this girl calling herself fat. Now, I don't say this to insult anybody in their early 20s, but she was giving me early 20s vibes, but she's supposed to be like a corporate attorney in her 30s. And I'm just thinking, how did you get so far ahead in your career as a high-powered attorney, yet you still speak to yourself the way you speak to yourself? And I just felt like she deserved more from everyone. The relationship itself was incredibly toxic. And it's just like, I don't want any of that in a Christmas book, you know? I just want like sweet, cheesy stuff. And it was a lot. I just don't think it was handled very well, and it just felt very toxic. So it was not for me. Okay, the next book, A Court of Frost and Starlight by Sarah J. Maas. In this series, A Court of Thorn and Roses series, I do not go over the summary of the book because it would give spoilers for the other books, so in case you haven't read the series. But this was 3.5 in the series, so it was like in between books 3 and 4. It's a novella, but it's almost 300 pages, so like in some cases that's almost a full book. Okay, so this book I gave a 2 out of 5 on the rating and 1 out of 5 on the spice factor. I spent book 3 happy that I continued on in the series because book 1 I didn't love. Book 2 I hated until the 75% mark. Book 3 blew me completely away and was a 5-star. Then I get to this book, and I feel like everything that I gained in book 3 was completely erased. Complete waste of time. It felt like this was maybe just a money grab. It's essentially like a Christmas novella, where they go around shopping for one another, but it's almost 300 pages. I'm going to send an invoice to Bookstagram for my time at this point because this series is just, it is something. I'll tell you that. Okay, the next book that I read was Hello Stranger by Catherine Center. This one I gave a 4.5 out of 5 on the stars, and it's squeaky clean, so 0 out of 5 on spice. There are no spicy scenes, just flirting. So Sadie has just recently gotten her big break in the art industry. She's a portrait artist. However, she ends up experiencing a medical emergency that leads to it impacting both her life and her art, but she is on a mission to figure out a way to make it happen anyway. This book was very, very unique. It was very, very special. It takes you on quite the ride. There are twists and turns, things that you just simply don't expect. It's not heavy on the romance, so if you're the type of person who likes just a little sprinkle of the romance is definitely happening, but I felt like Sadie and her journey was more the forefront. Her exploring a lot of feelings that she has regarding her family and herself and what success means to her. Her friendships were beautiful. It was such a well-rounded book. The family situation that comes in ends up adding like such a deep and emotional layer to the book that I truly didn't expect. I felt like the only reason this wasn't a 5-star for me was because I felt like more could have been developed with that situation. I feel like there was real estate used in this book that could have been instead dedicated to that situation. But overall, I just absolutely loved this book, and I just felt it was so unique. And if you just need to like mix up because you've been reading like the same formula books over and over and over again, this could be the one for you. Okay, the next book that I read was called Business or Pleasure by Rachel Lynn Solomon. This one was a 3-star for me out of 5, and the spice factor was a 1 out of 5. This follows Chandler, who has been a ghostwriter for several large name celebrities for quite some time, and she's starting to get to the point where she's feeling like she's lost her own identity. She ends up having a horrible one-night stand, and then she goes to meet a new client the next day to ghostwrite for, and it ends up being her one-night stand that she was unaware was famous. For me, the problem with this book is it is incredibly awkward, and I think that I had a hard time getting past the awkward stage. There was some funniness in the book. I did enjoy the characters because I felt like they were not your typical character, but I just could not get past the awkwardness. There was some really great topics that were discussed in a very open and vulnerable way in this book, so I definitely appreciated it for that, but I just didn't find myself enjoying this book at all. The next book that I read was The Boston Girl, and this was by Anita Diamant. This book I gave a 4 out of 5. It's more of a women's fiction, so there's no spice whatsoever. It's not a romance book. It mostly follows Addie, who's Boston born to a family of immigrants, and it's set in the early 1900s. This book was completely different from what I normally read. This book was more of like an ordinary walkthrough of everyday life in the early 1900s for this one specific woman. There's not anything compelling about it. It's definitely a slower read. I took this very slow. I'm talking like I was reading this in the background of other books. I would read like 3 or 4 chapters at a time. It was nothing that captivates you or anything like that, but I found myself really enjoying it. I was constantly thinking about the characters, and I felt like there was just something special about the way that I was visiting the characters, the way that the writing was done. It truly felt like I was visiting the characters. It was written in a way where Addie is telling the story to her granddaughter, and it almost felt like I was getting to read like through my grandmother's journals or something. That's how it felt. So there was like a specialness in the simplicity of this book, I would say. Okay, the next book that I read was called Big Nick Energy by Morgan Elizabeth. This book I gave a 4 out of 5 on the stars and 1.5 out of 5 on the spice factor. So this follows Shay, who just recently escaped a traumatic marriage, and she ends up going to Thanksgiving with an almost ex-boyfriend. They had gone on a date but decided just to be friends. And his father ends up putting his foot inside his mouth and is determined to figure out a way to make it up to her. Definitely look up trigger warnings before you dive into this book. There's a lot of deep things that are happening. I loved the messages that were happening in the book. I loved both of the main characters. This book was definitely worth the read, but I felt like it was really repetitive, and there was like this constant nicknaming that was happening. And I don't know if it's just a me thing, but that was driving me nuts. It was very cringy. The spicy scenes were really, really good though. So if you like spicy scenes and spicy romances, the chemistry was really on fire in this one. Overall, it was fast, it was fun, and it was a good holiday read. So there's that. Okay, the next book that I read was called All the Dangerous Things by Stacey Willingham. This book I gave a 4.5 out of 5. It's a thriller, so there's no spicy scenes. This is probably one of the better thrillers that I read this year. This follows Isabel, who has been living every mother's nightmare for the past year because her son had gone missing and there are absolutely no leads in his case. As things are starting to go on, she's realizing that she doesn't even trust her own memory of that evening. This book took me on a wild, wild ride. I would definitely look up trigger warnings on this one, especially if you happen to be a parent. The topic was very difficult to read. However, I will say this, somehow this author took a very heavy topic and didn't make it where like my heart was racing or I felt, I don't know, I never got too emotionally scarred from this book. I feel like the author did a great job at diving into the topic, but still making it feel suspenseful and not terrifying, if that makes sense. I really, really, really enjoyed how the author reveals pieces of the story. I felt like it was very unique in the way that she opened you up and you never felt like you were getting a download of information at one time. It felt like little pieces were trickled in. I also enjoyed the characters enough where they were suspicious but not irritating to me, and that's a big thing. If you've watched any of my book reviews before, you know, in thrillers, it takes a lot for me to get into characters, and I think the author did a really good job with these ones. This is a thriller that I would definitely recommend as long as you've researched the trigger warnings and feel comfortable proceeding. Okay, the next book that I read was Bringing Down the Duke by Evie Dunmore, I believe. This one is a historical romance. I gave this one a 4.5 out of 5, and for spice, I gave it a 1 out of 5. This story follows Annabelle, who is the daughter of a vicar. I'm not confident that's how you say that word, V-I-C-A-R. Let me know. But anyways, she is the daughter of a vicar. We're going to go with it. She's brilliant, and she's also a major player in the women's suffrage movement. Her cause leads her to go meet the Duke of Montgomery, who is in the opposing party to the suffrage movement. She is drawn to him, and she can't help herself, but she's had some issues with powerful men in the past, and she's determined not to repeat her same mistakes. I did not want to put this book down. I absolutely love it, and I'm so happy I own it now. It was captivating, and I just loved the characters so much. I felt like they were so mature. Sprinkles of frustration throughout this book that kept you really invested, but it never felt like too much where I was really irritated with the book. This book feels like a mashup of like a lot of great things. Downton Abbey, Bridgerton, Pride and Prejudice. It felt like all of those things kind of mixed into one. I loved the social injustice piece and how it was discussed. It never felt really preachy. It felt like both sides were kind of discussed in a very mature and diplomatic way. But I was fascinated by this book and I could not recommend it more. The romance is definitely like in the background of the book. I felt like Annabelle's women's suffrage journey was more the forefront of it. But overall, I felt like this was a great book. It's a series and I truly cannot wait to read on. Okay, the next book that I read was called His Lady of Mistletoe, and it's by Charlotte Jardine. This was a novella and I gave it a 5-star rating, 0 out of 5 on the spice factor. It was squeaky clean. And this follows Beth, who is the daughter of a baron, but she prefers to spend her time and her energy giving back to the community as a nurse. When one of her patients goes missing, she sets forth to go find him and ends up having a run-in with his nephew, who assumes the worst of her because of who she is. I felt like this story was so sweet and so heartwarming, and there was such a beautiful message in the background of this book. The verbiage in this book was just elegant, and it just made the book that much more romantic. I just was swept away. It was swoon-worthy. It was just, I don't know, I loved it. I felt like it was the perfect amount of pages. I didn't need more, I didn't need less. And I felt like the connection between the two characters was so authentic and strong because of the way the writer builds it up. Everything I needed for a Christmas romance novella was delivered in this book. The next book that I read was A Court of Silver Flames by Sarah J. Maas. So this is the final book so far in the A Court of Thorn and Roses series. As I mentioned earlier in this video, I'm not going to give a summary because I don't want to give spoilers away to the previous books. This one was a 2.5 out of 5 for me. Spice factor was a 1.5 out of 5. There are spicy scenes in it. I completely understand that people have different reader styles. I totally get it. I have friends that recommend books to me that I don't love, and I have books that I recommend them that they don't love. We all have different reader styles, but I am never, ever going to understand the hype behind this series. Ever. I did not care about these characters at all after walking away from a series that I dedicated thousands of pages to reading. Didn't care about them at all. I was excited to spend time with the main character in this book because it's someone that I was intrigued by. She's not everybody's favorite from what I've seen online, but she's someone that intrigued me, and I just felt like justice was not done to her. I feel like what she goes through and the way the author writes it as if she's a villain just made me very irritated. So at the end of the day, I can never get my time back. This is one that I would say is not worth your time. I would just say it. I would say it. All right, the next book that I read was called In the Weeds by B.K. Borison. And this is in the Lovelight Farms series. If you ever read Lovelight Farms, this is the perfect time of year to do it because it's set on a Christmas tree farm. And I want to say I gave it a 4.5 out of 5. It's really adorable. This one, I gave a 3.75 out of 5. And for Spice, I gave a 1 out of 5. This follows Evelyn, who is a social media star who is starting to burn out. She is talking to her assistant and realizes that the last place that she felt happy was in a small town, which is the one from Lovelight Farms. The problem is that town also has a man that she ran away from after a one-night stand. To me, this book is very slow, and it took a long time for me to warm up to it. It's a very, very slow burn. So if you're like the type of person who likes romance to be like at the forefront and at the beginning, this one wasn't for you. I also felt like the plot was really light on this one, so there's not a lot going on, but it kind of worked out perfect for when I was reading it because I had just finished the fantasy series, so I needed something kind of cozy and that I didn't have to invest a lot of energy into. You know what I mean? So anyways, that's my thoughts on that one. Okay, and then the last book that I read in the month was Evie Drake Starts Over by Linda Holmes. This one was a romance. I gave it a 3 out of 5 on the stars and then 0.5 out of 5 on Spice. There's not like explicit scenes, but they are kind of discussed a little bit, but it's not super heavy. So if you're not into them, I'd say this one may be okay for you. Evie had recently lost her husband, and she feels like there's an expectation that she should feel like she's been destroyed. But in reality, she was about to leave him after several years of feeling underappreciated. She ends up taking on a roommate that her best friend lets her know about, and he's a retired baseball player who's trying to hide away from the limelight. This book just wasn't a love for me. I just never got into the characters. I never felt like their connection was very strong. I liked the maturity of both of them and how they handled communication and how they handled their relationship, but it was almost too mature. It was almost like they had such a lukewarm feeling towards each other that they didn't care enough to be passionate. You know what I mean? So I don't know, it just wasn't one of those ones that like sweeps you off your feet. I thought the setting was really cute. The whole premise was really cute, but it just was not a love for me. Okay, now we're going to quickly discuss the books that I plan to read in the month of December. Spoiler alert, it's already like middle December, so I have actually gotten through some of these, but I'm still going to go over it with you. So Iron Flame is a big one, Rebecca Yarros. I actually haven't read it yet, but I have started it. I'm on chapter 3. Assistant to the Villain, that's by like Hannah something. Read that, loved it. So look forward to the review on that at the end of this month. Or check out my Instagram because I just posted my review on that if you can't wait. The Siren of Sussex by Mimi Matthews. I had started this one and then had to return it because my library loan expired, but I'm looking forward to getting back into it. One Last Shot by Betty Cayuet. Hopefully I'm saying that correctly. Redeeming Love by Francine Rivers. I did read that, and that is also on my Instagram if you want a preview on what I thought. The Layover by Lacey Walden. Exodus by Kate Stewart. Hidden Pictures by Jason Reculach. He's Not My Type by Megan Quinn. I love Megan Quinn. The Christmas Orphans Club by Becca Freeman. I'm hoping my library one will come through before the end of the month. The Mistletoe Bet by Maren Moore. And Tessa Bailey's Wreck the Halls. So those are all the books that I'm hoping to read. We have a lot going on this month, though. I did get through 1, 2, 3 of them so far. So I gave myself 12 to read, so I've got 9 more to go, and today is December 12th. We'll see. Some of them might be fast, so we'll see what we can do. Iron Flame, though, is like 700 pages, so we're going to see. What are you hoping to read in the month of December? Are you going to try and read one of the books I just talked about from my November wrap-up? Let me know. So thank you so much for taking some time out of your day to spend it with me. It means the absolute world to me. If you enjoyed this video, please be sure to subscribe before you leave, and I hope you have a magical day. Bye.